Let us now, having learned from books all that they have to teach us of a very ancient history, leave the science others have acquired and look at the bees with our own eyes. An hour spent in the midst of the apiary will be less instructive, perhaps, but the things we shall see will be infinitely more stimulating and more actual. I have not yet forgotten the first apiary I saw, where I learned to love the bees. It was many years ago, in a large village of Dutch Flanders, the sweet and pleasant country whose love for brilliant color rivals that of Zealand, even the concave mirror of Holland. A country that gladly spreads out before us as so many pretty, thoughtful toys. Toys. Her illuminated gables and wagons and towers, her cupolas and clocks that gleam, clocks that gleam at the end of the passage. Her little trees marshalled in line along quays and canal banks, waiting one almost might think for some quite beneficent ceremony. Her boats and barges with sculptured poops. Her flower-like doors and windows, immaculate dams and elaborate many-colored drawbridges, and her little varnished houses, bright as new pottery, from which bell-shaped dames come forth, all a-glitter with silver and gold to milk the cows. In the white-hedged fields are spread the linen on flowery lawns, cut into patterns of oval and lozenge and most astoundingly green. To this spot where life would seem more restricted than elsewhere, if it be possible, for life indeed to become restricted. A sort of aged philosopher had retired, an old man somewhat akin to Virgil's. Man equals to kings and approaching the gods, quote unquote. Man equal to kings and approaching the gods. Whereto La Fontaine might have added, quote, and like the gods, content and at rest, unquote. And like the gods, content and at rest. Here had he built his refuge, being a little weary, not disgusted, for the large aversions are unknown to the sage, but a little weary of interrogating men, whose answers to the only interesting questions one can put concerning nature and her veritable laws are far less simple than those that are given by animals and plants. Far less simple than those that are given to animals and plants. His happiness, like the Scythian philosophers, lay all in the beauties of his garden, and best loved and visited most often. Lay in all the beauties of his garden, and best loved and visited most often was the apiary, composed of 12 domes of straw, some of which he had painted a bright pink, and some a clear yellow, but most of all a tender blue, tender blue. Having noticed long before Sir John Lubbock's demonstrations the bees' fondness for this color, these hives stood against the wall of the house, in the angle formed by one of those pleasant and graceful Dutch kitchens, whose earthenware dresser, all bright with copper and tin, reflected itself through the open door to the peaceful canal, and the water burdened with these familiar images beneath its curtain of poplars let one's eyes to a calm horizon of mills and of meadows, Here, as in all places, the hives lent a new meaning to the flowers, and the silence, the balm of the air, and the rays of the sun. One seemed to have drawn very near to the festival spirit of nature. One was content to rest at this radiant crossroad, where the aerial ways converge and divide at the busy and tuneful bearers of all country perfumes unceasingly travel from dawn unto dusk. One heard the musical voice of the garden, whose loveliest hours revealed their rejoicing soul and sang of their gladness. One came hither to the school of the bees to be taught the preoccupations of all-powerful nature, the harmonious concord of the three kingdoms, the indefatigable organization of life, and the lesson of ardent and disinterested work. And another lesson, too, with a moral as good, that the heroic workers taught there, and emphasized, as it were, with the fiery darts of their myriad wings, was to appreciate the somewhat vague savor of leisure, to enjoy the almost unspeakable delights of those immaculate days. One came hither to the school of the bees to be taught the preoccupations of all-powerful nature, the harmonious concord of the three kingdoms, the indefatigable organization of life, and the lesson of ardent and disinterested work, and another lesson, too, with a moral as good, that the heroic workers taught there, and emphasized, as it were, with the fiery darts of their myriad wings, was to appreciate the somewhat vague savor of leisure, to enjoy the almost unspeakable delights of those immaculate days that revolved on themselves in the fields of space, forming merely a transparent globe, as void of memory as the happiness without alloy. One came hither to the school of the bees to be taught the preoccupations of all-powerful nature, the harmonious concord of the three kingdoms, the indefatigable organization of life, and the lesson of ardent and disinterested work, and another lesson, too, with a moral as good, that the heroic workers taught there, and emphasized, as it were, with the fiery darts of their myriad wings, was to appreciate the somewhat vague savor of leisure, to enjoy the almost unspeakable delights of those immaculate days that revolved on themselves in the fields of space, forming merely a transparent globe, as void of memory as the happiness without alloy. In order to follow as simply as possible the life of the bees through the year, we will take a hive that awakes in the spring and duly starts on its labors, and then we shall meet in their natural order all the great episodes, viz., the formation and departure of the swarm, the foundation of the new city, the birth, combat, and nuptial flight of the young queens. The massacre of the males, and finally, the return of the sleep of winter. With each of these episodes, there will go the necessary explanations as to the laws, habits, peculiarities, and events that produce and accompany it, so that, when arrived at the end of the bee's short year, which extends only from April to the last days of September, we shall have gazed upon all the mysteries of the palace. Oh, honey. Before we open it, therefore, and throw a general glance around, we only need say that the hive is composed of a queen, the mother of all her people, of thousands of workers or neuters, who are incomplete and sterile females, and lastly of some hundreds of males, from whom one shall be chosen as the sole and unfortunate consort of the queen, that the workers will elect in the future after the more or less voluntary departure of the reigning mother. The first time that we open a hive, there comes over us an emotion akin to that we might feel at profaning some unknown object, charged perhaps with dreadful surprise, a tomb. A legend of menace and peril still clings to the bees. There is the distressful recollection of her sting, which produces a pain so characteristic that one knows not wherewith to compare it. A kind of destroying dryness, a flame of the desert rushing over the wounded limb. As though these daughters of the sun had distilled a dazzling poison from their father's angry rays in order more effectively to defend the treasure they gather from his beneficent hours. It is true that were someone who neither knows nor respects the customs and character of the bee suddenly to fling open the hive, it would turn at once into a burning bush of heroism and anger. But the slight amount of skill needed to handle it with impunity can be most readily acquired. Let but a little smoke be deftly applied, much coolness and gentleness be shown, and our well-armed workers will suffer themselves to be despoiled without dreaming of drawing their sting. Let but a little smoke be deftly applied, much coolness and gentleness be shown, and our well-armed workers will suffer themselves to be despoiled without dreaming of drawing their sting. It is not the fact, as some have maintained, that the beasts recognize their master, nor have they any fear of man, but at the smell of the smoke, at the large, slow gestures that traverse their dwellings without threatening them, they imagine that this is not the attack of an enemy against whom defense is possible, but that it is a force or a natural catastrophe whereto they do well to submit. Instead of vainly struggling, therefore, they do what they can to safeguard the future. And obeying a foresight that for once is in error, they fly to their reserves of honey, into which they eagerly dip in order to possess within themselves the wherewithal to start a new city, immediately and no matter where, should the ancient one be destroyed or they be compelled to forsake it. The first impression of the novice before whom an observation hive, by observation hive is meant a hive of glass, furnished with black curtains or shutters. The best kind have only one comb, thus permitting both faces to be studied. These hives can be placed in a drawing-room, library, etc. without inconvenience or danger. The bees that inhabit the one I have in my study in Paris are able, even in the stony desert of that great city, to find the wherewithal to nourish themselves and to prosper. The first impression of the novice before whom an observation hive is opened will be one of some disappointment. He had been told that this little glass case contained an unparalleled activity, an infinite number of wise laws, and a startling amalgam of mystery, experience, genius, calculation, science, of various industries, of certitude and prescience, of intelligent habits and curious feelings and virtues. All that he sees is a confused mass of little reddish groups, somewhat resembling roasted coffee berries or bunches of raisins piled against the glass. They look more dead than alive. Their movements are slow, incoherent, and incomprehensible. Can these be the wonderful drops of light he had seen but a moment ago, unceasingly flashing and sparkling as they darted among the pearls and the gold of 1,000 white open chalices? Oh! Oh! The first impression of the novice before whom an observation hive is open will be one of some disappointment. He had been told that this little glass case contained an unparalleled activity, an infinite number of wise laws, and a startling amalgam of mystery, experience, genius, calculation, science, of various industries, of certitude and prescience, of intelligent habits and curious feelings and virtues. All that he sees is a confused mass of little reddish groups, somewhat resembling roasted coffee berries or bunches of raisins piled against the glass. They look more dead than alive. Their movements are slow, incoherent, and incomprehensible. Can these be the wonderful drops of light he had seen but a moment ago, unceasingly flashing and sparkling as they darted among the pearls and the gold of 1,000 wide-open chalices? They appear to be shivering in the darkness, to be numbed, suffocated, so closely are they huddled together. One might fancy they were alien captives, or queens dethroned, who have had their one moment of glory in the midst of their radiant garden, and are now compelled to return to the shameful squalor of their poor overcrowded home. It is with them as with all that is deeply real. They must be studied, and one must learn how to study them. The inhabitant of another planet who should see men and women coming and going almost imperceptibly through our streets, crowding at certain times around certain buildings, or waiting for one knows not what, without apparent movement in the depths of their dwellings, might conclude therefrom that they too were miserable and inert, miserable and inert, miserable and inert. It takes time to distinguish the manifold activity contained in this inertia, and indeed, every one of the little, almost motionless groups in the hive is incessantly working, incessantly working, incessantly working, incessantly working, incessantly working, incessantly working. Each at a different trade. Repose is unknown to any, and such, for instance, as seem the most torpid, as they hang in dead clusters against the glass, are entrusted with the most mysterious and fatiguing task of all. It is they who secrete and form the wax. But the details of this universal activity will be given in their place. For the moment, we need only call attention to the essential trait in the nature of the beast, which accounts for the extraordinary agglomeration of the various workers. The bee is above all, and even to a greater extent than the ant, a creature of the crowd. She can live only in the midst of a multitude. When she leaves the hive, which is so densely packed that she has to force her way with blows of her head through the living walls that enclose her, she departs from her proper element. She will dive for an instant into flower-filled space, as the swimmer will dive into the sea that is filled with pearls. But under pain of death, it behoves her at regular intervals to return and breathe the crowd, as the swimmer must return and breathe the air. Isolate her, and however abundant the food or favorable the temperature, she will expire in a few days, not of hunger or cold, but of loneliness. From the crowd, from the city, she derives an invisible aliment that is necessary to her as honey. For in them the individual is nothing, her existence conditional only, and herself, for one indifferent moment, a winged organ of the race. Her whole life is an entire sacrifice to the manifold, everlasting being whereof she forms part. It is strange to note that it was not always so. We find even today among the melliferous Hymenoptera all the stages of progressive civilization of our own domestic bee. At the bottom of the scale we find her working alone in wretchedness, often not seeing her offspring, the prosopis, the colettes, etc., sometimes living in the midst of the limited family that she produces annually, as in the case of the humble bee. Then she forms temporary associations, the panurgi, the dasypodoe, the hakliti, etc. And at last we arrive to successive stages at the almost perfect but pitiless society of our hives, where the individual is entirely immersed in the republic, and the republic is, in its turn, invariably sacrificed to the abstract and immortal city of the future. Let us not too hastily deduce from these facts conclusions that apply to man. He possesses the power of withstanding certain of nature's laws, and to know whether such resistance be right or wrong is the gravest and obscurest point in his morality. But it is deeply interesting to discover what he will of nature may be. But it is deeply interesting to discover what the will of nature may be in a different world, and this will is revealed with extraordinary clearness in the evolution of the Hymenoptera. Hymenoptera, which of all the inhabitants of this globe possess the highest degree of intellect after that of man. The aim of nature is manifestly the improvement of the race, but no less manifest is her inability or refusal to obtain such improvement except at the cost of the liberty, the rights, and the happiness of the individual. In proportion as a society organizes itself and rises in scale, so does the shrinkage enter the private life of each one of its members. So does the shrinkage enter the private life of its members. Where there is progress, it is the result only of a more and more complete sacrifice of the individual to the general interest. Each one is compelled, first of all, to renounce his vices, which are acts of independence. For instance, at the last stage, but one of Hyperion civilization, we find the humble bees, which are cannibals. The adult workers are incessantly hovering around the eggs, which they seek to devour, and the mother has to display the utmost stubbornness in their defense. Then, having freed himself from his most dangerous vices, each individual has to acquire a certain number of more and more painful virtues. Among the humble bees, for instance, the workers do not dream of renouncing love, whereas our domestic bee lives in a state of perpetual chastity. And indeed we soon shall show how much more she has to abandon in exchange for the comfort and security of the hive, for its architectural, economic, and political perfection. We shall return to the evolution of the Hymenoptera in the chapter devoted to the progress of the species.